There's a version of you the world has never met, a shadow self forged in fire, stripped of every comforting illusion. He's colder, smarter, unnervingly calm under pressure, and brutal when necessary. He doesn't care what anyone thinks because he's seen the puppet strings that bind the masses, and he's cut his own. You won't find him in the cushioned embrace of comfort, nor will you meet him amidst the shallow laughter of parties. He emerges only when you vanish, when you disconnect with surgical precision from everyone and everything that once defined you. Machiavelli, the architect of strategic power, would whisper a truth that most fear to confront. Power doesn't bloom in the soft garden of good feelings. It blossoms in the barren, windswept plains where you are stripped bare of unnecessary friends, of the craving for validation, of every distracting siren song. You are forced to build not with resources, but with the raw, unadulterated force of your mind alone. That version of you, the one the world fears, doesn't beg for advice. He commands it or dismisses it. He doesn't justify his ambition to the timid or the weak. He simply executes. He doesn't hesitate to destroy, with clinical efficiency, anything that slows his ascent. But this formidable self, this strategic weapon, will only fully manifest after you have been alone long enough to cease fearing the profound, unsettling silence. Most men never reach this terrifying crucible. They falter, they buckle under the existential pressure, they scamper back to the deceptive warmth of comfort, to the herd that promises safety in numbers but delivers only mediocrity. Don't be like them. This isn't just a video, it's a declaration of war against the soft thinking that keeps you a pawn. I'm going to reveal why solitude is not isolation, but the ultimate, most dangerous strategy. You will learn how to weaponize silence, not just as an absence of noise, but as a forge for mental dominance, a laboratory where you dismantle and rebuild yourself. You will learn how to use being alone to become the most dangerous, most strategically potent version of yourself, the one capable of turning the tide of any game. Stay until the bitter end, because once you understand this, once you truly grasp the implications, you will never see solitude, or yourself, the same way again. The world will suddenly appear not as a complex maze, but as a system of levers and fulcrums, ready for your calculated touch. Most people stumble through life in a cognitive haze, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are never alone long enough to perceive reality with clarity. They exist in a perpetual fog of ceaseless conversation, a cacophony of others' opinions, a turbulent sea of borrowed emotions, and a relentless assault of digital noise. Surrounded by a constant stream of external input, they unconsciously adopt beliefs that were never truly their own, echoing the collective rather than articulating individual thought. They react rather than initiate. They conform rather than innovate. They follow rather than lead. And worst of all, they become masterful at lying to themselves, because there is always someone, some social echo chamber, some digital affirmation, to help maintain the comforting, debilitating illusion of their chosen narrative. This is the great deception, the social contract of weakness. You give up your truth for the illusion of belonging. But the man who chooses to isolate himself, he willingly sheds all of that. The meticulously crafted masks of social performance crack under the immense pressure of self-confrontation. The comfortable lies, spun to appease both himself and others, melt away like frost in the sun. And for the very first time, he sees what the vast majority of people will never dare to witness: the raw, unfiltered, often brutal truth. And that, my friend, is why solitude isn't merely a luxury of the privileged or an indulgence of the eccentric. It is a weapon of devastating strategic power. Because the truth you uncover in that profound, challenging silence grants you an unfair, almost supernatural advantage over the rest of the world, those still entangled in the illusion. Machiavelli understood this with a terrifying clarity that few have matched since. When he was exiled from the political arena, stripped of his influence and publicly disgraced, he didn't waste his precious, now unbound time lamenting betrayal or railing against injustice. He did what the powerful always do when cornered. He withdrew. He receded into the shadows, observing the mechanisms of human nature without the distorting filters of social expectation or self-interest. He studied not just books, but the very essence of power, human motivation, and the subtle currents that drive societies. And what did he unearth in that stark isolation? A series of truths that polite society, then as now, vehemently refuses to admit. He discovered that most men are cowards, camouflaging their fear and self-interest behind the convenient veneer of morality. He realized that loyalty is a conditional construct, easily broken by shifting tides of advantage or fear. He concluded, chillingly, that fear is a far more reliable foundation for control than love, for love is fickle and personal, while fear is primal and universal. He saw, with the clarity of a predator, that people, deep down, desire to be controlled. They simply demand that it be done skillfully, subtly, without overtly revealing the chains. These are the inconvenient, actionable truths that the consensus rejects, for their acceptance would shatter the delicate illusion of human goodness that keeps the system stable. But in the crucible of his isolation, Machiavelli not only confronted these truths, but forged them into an ironclad philosophy. And because he dared to do so, he could predict human behavior with the dispassionate precision of a grandmaster playing a game of chess, anticipating not just moves, but entire strategies. Now, pause and ask yourself, with a chilling honesty, how much clearer would your vision be if you surgically detached from the constant, debilitating noise? Imagine a world with no sycophantic friends sugarcoating your flaws, no curated social media feeding you a toxic diet of fake status and manufactured aspiration, no shallow conversations diluting the sharp edge of your thinking. Just you versus the raw, unvarnished facts of your existence, your ambition, your reality. It is brutal, yes. It is profoundly uncomfortable, but it is undeniably, powerfully real. And once you face reality without the narcotic of illusion, once you strip away every comforting lie, you gain something priceless, something that can move empires. Leverage. Because while others are making emotional, reactive decisions caught in the undertow of popular opinion or personal drama, you are calculating, cold, and precise. While they are chasing fleeting pleasure, you are positioning for long-term dominance. While they are playing the predictable role they were told to play by a society eager for compliance, you, in your solitude, are quietly writing the script for the next act. That is the profound gift of strategic isolation. Not merely time, not just focus, but an insight so potent that others simply cannot handle it. You begin to discern, with unnerving accuracy, who genuinely respects you, who secretly fears you, and who merely pretends to like you out of convenience or a desperate need for what you might offer. You see the intricate web of lies people tell, not just to each other, but most dangerously, to themselves. And most importantly, most transformatively, you cease lying to yourself. That is the moment your power becomes real, undeniable, and permanent. Because it is not built on the shifting sands of delusion or borrowed confidence. It is constructed brick by unyielding brick on the bedrock of undeniable observation, earned through the painful, solitary process of self-reckoning. Solitude strips away the flattering, seductive noise of the world. It leaves you face to face with your own laziness, your deep-seated vanity, your crippling emotional dependencies, the hollowness of your fake goals, and the flimsy construct of your false identity. And if you endure that excruciating process, if you walk through that fire without flinching, without running back to the numbing comfort of the crowd, something incredibly rare happens. You no longer need to be right in the eyes of others. You just want to see clearly, to understand the operating system of reality. And that clarity, that ruthless, dispassionate vision gives you an unfair, almost unassailable advantage over everyone still lost in the fog of collective delusion. You will see patterns they completely miss. You will identify weaknesses they willfully ignore. You will perceive complex power dynamics unfolding while they are still entangled in fleeting emotions. You will become, to put it starkly, inhumanly effective. This is why so many of history's most powerful, most consequential men were, in essence, loners. Not because they hated people, but because they valued truth, raw, unvarnished, brutal truth, more than the comforting illusion of connection. And truth, that kind of unfiltered, actionable truth, is found exclusively in solitude. You cannot access it when you are striving desperately to be liked, when your very existence is predicated on external approval. You cannot grasp it when you are paralyzed by the fear of offending people, of disrupting the fragile social order. You cannot access it when you are addicted, like a junkie, to the fleeting hit of approval. You access it only when you are profoundly, terrifyingly alone, when there is no one left to lie to, not even yourself. So, if you crave real vision, a strategic lens that penetrates the superficial, not just hollow motivation, if you demand strategic power, not just the fleeting shimmer of surface success, if you truly want to see how the world actually works, with its hidden levers and its unspoken rules, then you must step away. You must withdraw into the strategic silence and stay there until every single one of your comforting illusions has died a painful, agonizing death. Because when they do, when the ash settles, you will not merely return. You will emerge as something that very few people ever become. You will not just act differently. You will see the entire game differently. And that, my friend, is not just the beginning of power. It is the foundation of unstoppable, unshakable dominance. Most people aren't truly free. It's not because they are literally in chains, but because they are irrevocably addicted to other people, addicted to attention, addicted to the saccharine praise of the crowd, addicted to the illusion of being liked. They cannot function without this constant external validation, this never-ending social feed. And that, in a world where true power demands self-sovereignty, makes them profoundly, dangerously weak. Dependency, in any form, is a sophisticated cage, a subtle slavery. Machiavelli, with his stark realism, warned us. The one who depends on others to stand will fall when they walk away. And in the modern world, a hyper-connected, validation-hungry society that describes a staggering 99% of people, they live in a perpetual state of quiet dread, a deep-seated fear of being alone, because their confidence isn't genuine. It's outsourced, a fragile construct built on the shifting sands of external opinion. They cannot truly think unless someone agrees with them, mirroring their thoughts. They cannot act decisively unless someone approves, giving them permission. They cannot even find peace or rest unless someone validates their worth, their existence, their effort. But the man who possesses the iron will to break this suffocating pattern, the man who consciously, strategically chooses solitude over the narcotic of approval, he becomes something truly terrifying. He becomes formidable precisely because he is no longer owned. He does not beg for affection. He commands respect. He does not chase popularity. He cultivates strategic alliances, or he simply moves alone. He doesn't wait to be chosen. With chilling self-reliance, he chooses himself. This is the profound, liberating work that solitude performs. It forces you, through sheer, unyielding necessity, to stand firmly on your own thoughts, to trust the raw, unfiltered wisdom of your own instincts, and to become, above all, mentally self-sufficient. That is the bedrock, the unshakable foundation of real power, the unyielding ability to move without seeking permission, to act without flinching in the face of disapproval, and to build empires without needing the hollow applause of the gallery. Let's dissect this practically, ruthlessly. When you are emotionally dependent on others, when your psychological well-being is tied to their reactions, you become tragically predictable. Your actions, your very decisions, become easy targets for manipulation. A clever adversary, or even a casual manipulator, need only say the right flattering words, offer the right morsel of approval, and you are lifted, your trajectory altered. Or they can simply ignore you, strategically withdraw their attention, and you are instantly disoriented, potentially destroyed. This is control, subtle yet absolute, and you, by your dependency, willingly handed them the levers. But when you choose strategic solitude, when you cultivate an unshakable emotional self-reliance, you ruthlessly remove their leverage. They cannot control a man who does not need them, a man whose internal compass is unswayed by their whims or their orchestrated rejections. This is precisely why society, in its infinite wisdom to maintain the status quo, conditions you from birth to fear being alone. Because a man who is comfortable, even thriving, in solitude cannot be governed by the usual mechanisms of social pressure, peer expectation, or the fear of ostracization. Machiavelli didn't romanticize human nature. He exposed its brutal, unadorned core. He saw that most people are relentlessly driven by fundamental needs: the need for security, the need for love and belonging, the insatiable need for status. And those very needs, he observed, are expertly exploited to control them like puppets, their strings pulled by unseen hands. But when you systematically cut those strings, when you no longer crave what others can give you, when you become an island of self-sufficiency, you become, in the truest sense, untouchable. You become a free radical in a system designed for predictable reactions. This is why kings, generals, and history's most effective rulers instinctively sought and cultivated periods of profound solitude, not because they were antisocial or inherently misanthropic, but because they understood a fundamental truth of power. It requires distance. Proximity, particularly unchecked and constant proximity, breeds familiarity. Familiarity, in turn, breeds a dangerous contempt, a casual disregard for authority, and contempt, unchecked, inevitably breeds weakness in the eyes of those you seek to govern. If you wish to be respected, truly respected, not merely liked, then you must learn to create strategic space around yourself. If you aspire to be powerful, not just influential, you must learn to walk alone, not as a symbol of your loneliness, but as a testament to your unassailable self-reliance. Because the one who walks alone moves faster, unburdened by the pace of the herd. He sees clearer, undistracted by the noise and illusions, and he acts without compromise, his decisions uncorrupted by the desperate need for consensus or approval. Let's make this actionable, brutally practical. What does strategic solitude look like in the real world, in the unforgiving arena of modern power? It is the deliberate, unapologetic act of saying no to invitations that waste your precious energy, that offer only fleeting entertainment but no genuine growth or strategic advantage. It is the courageous act of stepping away from people, even those you once considered friends, who offer only superficial comfort but no intellectual challenge, no expansion of your perspective, no impetus for your personal evolution. It is being utterly, terrifyingly okay with being misunderstood, being disliked, or even being subtly feared, because your focus is anchored on something monumentally larger, something more profound than mere social approval. It is choosing long, arduous nights of deep thinking, meticulous planning, and relentless building, while the vast majority are lost in the trivialities of small talk and the seductive paralysis of digital distraction. It is not easy, it is certainly not glamorous, and it is most definitely not popular, for popularity often comes at the cost of power. But this, precisely this, is how the sharpest minds in history, from philosophers to warlords to titans of industry, built their indelible empires. Machiavelli, remember, did not study power through people-pleasing or the cultivation of a wide social circle. He studied it through the cold, surgical lens of psychological warfare, the intricate mechanics of manipulation, and ruthless, detached observation. And he did it, crucially, alone. So, I demand you ask yourself, with an unblinking gaze into your own soul, can you truly detach from the insidious need for constant attention, for the endless feed of validation? Can you, with strategic intent, walk away from shallow relationships and the deceptive illusion of fake support? Can you trust your own inner voice, that potent wellspring of strategic insight, more than the overwhelming, often contradictory noise of the crowd? If you can begin to cultivate this sacred, terrifying independence, you are already light years ahead of 99% of men, because most will never escape the trap. They will chase the ephemeral warmth of love. They will chase the intoxicating, fleeting roar of applause. They will chase the comforting illusion of belonging, believing these are the hallmarks of a successful life. But the man who builds without needing, the man who thinks without asking, the man who moves alone, that man is not just dangerous, he is a force of nature. He doesn't need to be liked. He doesn't need to explain his moves. He doesn't need anything from the world, and precisely because of that, he can strategically take everything he desires. The world, in its vast, interconnected sprawl, worships connection. It glorifies relationships, friendships, constant interaction, the perpetual hum of the collective. It screams at you, through every media channel and social expectation, don't be alone. That's dangerous. That's sad. That's a sign of failure. And that, my friends, is precisely why most people remain tragically powerless, perpetually tethered to the whims of others. Let's be unequivocally clear, because this is the core of the great deception. Being alone is not weakness. Being surrounded by people who distract you, who subtly slow you down, who endlessly dilute your focus, your energy, and your strategic intent, that, my friends, is the true debilitating weakness. Solitude, when embraced properly, when understood as a strategic imperative, is not a void. It is the birthplace of power, the silent forge where true strength is hammered out. Niccolo Machiavelli, the master strategist himself, knew this better than anyone who has walked the corridors of power. When he was ruthlessly exiled from political life, stripped of his influence, his status, and publicly disgraced, he didn't debase himself by begging to be let back into the fold. He didn't grovel for sympathy or seek to mend fractured relationships. He did what a true strategist does. He disappeared. He retreated into a profound, deliberate silence. And in that silence, that period of intense, solitary contemplation, he didn't wallow in self-pity. He wrote The Prince, a cold, calculated, and terrifyingly effective blueprint for controlling people, influencing rulers, and navigating the brutal, amoral realities of political systems. He didn't need an army at his back. He didn't need the hollow approval of the Florentine elite. He only needed one thing: distance from the incessant, debilitating noise. Why? Because the crowd, the constant presence of others, inevitably weakens your mind. When you are perpetually surrounded by people, you unconsciously begin to think like them. You absorb their habits, their biases, their fears, their limitations, like a sponge soaking up stagnant water. You conform without ever consciously realizing it. You mirror their insecurities, and in doing so, you unwittingly limit the boundless potential of your own thinking. Solitude, true solitude, shatters that hypnotic effect. It pulls you forcefully out of the collective current. It grants you the invaluable perspective to see the world from above as it truly is, with all its hidden mechanisms and its subtle manipulations. When you are truly alone, something strange and profoundly powerful happens. Your vision sharpens, cutting through deception. Your judgment strengthens, becoming resistant to influence. You become harder to fool, harder to sway, harder to subtly manipulate. That is precisely why powerful men, throughout history, retreat into periods of intense solitude before they make their decisive rise. It's not a retreat. It's a strategic refinement. You cannot build an impregnable fortress in the middle of a chaotic carnival. You cannot develop surgical precision while being distracted every 5 minutes by trivialities. And you absolutely cannot build mental dominance, that unshakable inner core, when you are emotionally entangled in everyone else's petty problems and dramas. Solitude is not loneliness. It is strategic detachment, a deliberate severing of the chains of dependence. Most people, often unknowingly, use others as emotional crutches. They are constantly surrounded by people, not because they are genuinely building anything meaningful or fostering profound connections, but because they are desperately, unconsciously avoiding themselves, avoiding the terrifying truth of their own inner landscape. But here's the hard, unvarnished truth that most will flinch from. If you cannot sit in a room alone without losing your mind, without resorting to constant distraction or external stimulus, you have no power, because true power, enduring power, demands sovereignty over yourself first and foremost. And that sovereignty, that mastery of your own inner world, is only truly tested when no one is watching, no one is applauding, and no one is there to offer comforting assistance. It's in that stark, isolated crucible that your true strength or your profound weakness is revealed. Let's delve into the psychology of this with Machiavellian precision. Your brain, that incredibly adaptive organ, is designed to adjust its operating system to whatever environment it finds itself in. So, if you are constantly immersed in a deluge of chatter, a maelstrom of distraction, and a superficial torrent of emotion, your brain will dutifully adjust to that chaos, becoming fragmented, reactive, and easily overstimulated. But when you deliberately isolate yourself, when you surgically cut off the noise, your mind is forcefully compelled to confront its own unvarnished contents. This is the point where most men shatter, because when you are truly alone, there is no one left to blame for your shortcomings. There are no external distractions to numb the uncomfortable truths, no fake friends to keep you perpetually comfortable in your mediocrity. There is only you and the raw, unblinking truth. And that truth, for the unprepared, is brutal. It exposes your profound laziness, your deeply ingrained excuses, your cowardice in the face of challenge. It demands, with an existential urgency, that you evolve, that you transform, or be devoured by your own unaddressed weaknesses. But if you possess the iron will to endure that grueling process, something incredibly rare and potent happens. You develop an unshakable clarity, a diamond-hard emotional independence. You become the kind of person who doesn't need, you choose. And that profound shift from need to choice makes you, quite simply, unstoppable. Machiavelli didn't advise relying on the fickle affections of the people. He stated, with chilling rationality, that it is much safer to be feared than loved. Why? Because love, he understood, is contingent upon closeness, upon shared emotion, upon constant access. But fear, true, strategic fear, can be meticulously built in absence. It can be powerfully maintained from a distance, through calculated moves and strategic silence. It doesn't require vulnerability. It requires control, and solitude, above all, trains you in that exact, precise control. It teaches you how to rigorously regulate yourself, how to become your own anchor without needing outside forces to stabilize your emotional or mental state. It builds an iron self-discipline because no one is watching, no one is holding you accountable but your own unforgiving standards. It builds a granite-like mental toughness because no one is there to offer encouragement or praise. You must draw from within. It builds an unparalleled clarity because the emotional fog of external opinion is entirely absent. And when you emerge from that crucible of solitude, you return fundamentally different, colder, sharper, relentlessly focused, strategically silent, utterly unbothered by the trivialities of opinions, completely uninterested in petty drama, and immune to the pervasive nonsense that grips the masses. People will undoubtedly say, "You've changed, you're distant, you're hard to reach." Good. Let them talk. You are not building your strategic empire to be liked. You are building it to be feared, to be respected, and to become, in the grand scheme of things, impossible to replace. So, yes, go silent. Disappear. Cut the noise with a surgeon's precision, and give yourself the sacred space to build what no one sees coming, because the man who can master solitude can, by extension, master anything the world throws at him. You cannot sharpen a blade in the midst of a raging storm, just as you cannot sharpen your mind in the ceaseless, chaotic noise of constant input. Today's world is a global addict to noise. The relentless ping of notifications, the ceaseless churn of conversations, the overwhelming clutter of information. Everyone is talking, yet tragically, almost no one is truly thinking. Most men are drowning in a torrent of undifferentiated input, consuming content with a ravenous hunger, yet never allowing the mental space for original thought to germinate and flourish. They consume all day, passively absorbing, then regurgitate what they hear, mistaking this mimicry for intelligence or insight. But here's the brutal, inconvenient truth. If you don't deliberately carve out space for profound silence, your mind will never become a weapon. It will remain a reactive echo chamber, a sponge for others' ideas, rather than a generator of its own. Machiavelli understood this foundational principle centuries ago. He was not some ivory tower philosopher who wrote from a position of pampered comfort. He wrote from the cold, stark reality of exile, rejection, and profound political humiliation. He seized that imposed silence, not to complain or commiserate, but to observe, to dissect, to sharpen his understanding of human nature and power dynamics with the precision of a master anatomist. He turned his mind into a scalpel, cutting through illusion to expose the raw mechanics of control. And what did he produce from that strategic stillness? A book that has terrified, enlightened, and guided rulers and strategists for over 500 years. Why? Because it was written in stillness, not with the reactive heat of emotion, but with the cold, surgical precision of pure, unadulterated intellect. You see, noise makes your mind reactive, always responding, never truly initiating. Silence, on the other hand, transforms it into a strategic instrument, a finely tuned machine for foresight and command. When you're constantly surrounded by people, you inevitably start thinking like them. You unconsciously absorb their fears, their self-imposed limits, their pervasive mediocrity. You become, by insidious degrees, part of the compliant herd, indistinguishable from the background noise. But when you deliberately separate yourself, when you surgically remove the external stimuli, the pervasive distractions, the constant onslaught of opinions, something fundamental shifts within your cognitive landscape. You begin to hear your own mind clearly, perhaps for the very first time in your life. And what you discover in that stark, internal dialogue might deeply disturb you. You'll realize how little of your so-called thinking was ever truly yours. You'll see, with a terrifying clarity, how much of your very identity, your self-concept, was derived from the reflections and expectations of others. You'll feel the profound, unsettling discomfort of realizing you've been mentally soft, cognitively asleep, a passenger in your own head. And that discomfort, that raw, agonizing confrontation with your true state, that is your moment of nascent power, because now, in the profound, revealing silence, you are given the opportunity to systematically rebuild. You start making decisions not based on what others might think or how they might react, but based on cold, hard calculation. You weigh consequences with Machiavellian detachment, not fleeting emotions. You consider all angles, anticipating outcomes, rather than seeking superficial approval. You think for the long game, the strategic chess match, not for the immediate, addictive hit of satisfaction. This, precisely this, is how true rulers think. This is how Machiavelli trained himself, isolated, outcast, rendered irrelevant to the superficial crowd, yet mentally 5 steps ahead of kings and emperors, predicting their downfall or their rise. Because the quietest room, the most disciplined silence, consistently produces the sharpest, most formidable mind. Look around you, observe the behavior of the masses. People talk too much because they think too little. They fear silence, not because it is empty, but because silence is a relentless mirror. It unflinchingly reveals the truth of their own emptiness, their unexamined lives, their profound lack of inner substance. And most people, let's be brutally honest, do not want truth. They crave comfort, even if that comfort is a gilded cage. But power, true, strategic power, does not reside in comfort. It resides in absolute clarity. And clarity, that laser-like focus on reality, comes only in the crucible of solitude. Here's what strategic silence, deliberately embraced, gives you: unyielding focus. Your mental energy stops scattering like dust in the wind. You become locked in, relentlessly precise. Iron discipline. You learn to control your impulses, your primal urges, rather than being controlled by them, becoming a master of your own internal state. Superior pattern recognition. You begin to see, with uncanny foresight, how people truly think, how they move, how they will inevitably fall into predictable traps. Unshakable self-control. You become harder to provoke, harder to read, harder to break, a strategic enigma. You stop reacting to stimuli. You start calculating responses. And this, precisely this, is when people begin to fear you, not with a base, animal fear, but with a profound, unsettling respect born of incomprehension, because they no longer understand you. You're not emotional, predictably swayed by rhetoric. You're not predictable, your moves are opaque. You're not normal. You operate on a different frequency. You have gone quiet, and in that quietness, you have become deadly. And when you finally choose to speak, your words don't just land, they strike like a hammer, forging new realities. Because your words weren't born from idle chatter or borrowed opinions, they were forged in the profound, strategic stillness of your solitary contemplation. This is why Machiavellian thinking is feared, even by those who secretly apply its principles. Because it is not loud, it is not impulsive, it is not driven by the herd. It is designed, meticulously, coldly designed. And the average mind, drowned in the superficial noise of the modern world, simply cannot compete with that level of strategic thought. So, understand this deeply. If you want your mind to become a lethal weapon, a tool for reshaping your world, you must separate. You must protect your time, your thoughts, your attention with the ferocity of an apex predator guarding its kill. You must train yourself to endure, even crave, silence, so your brain stops needing constant distraction and starts, instead, producing brilliant, actionable strategy. Silence is not emptiness. It is the most profound form of concentration, and the man who can sit still, think deeply, and act with surgical precision, that man becomes something truly rare and truly powerful, a thinker among talkers, a ruler among followers, a weapon in a world drowning in noise. There's a hidden currency, more valuable than money, scarcer than loyalty, and infinitely more dangerous when mismanaged than any physical weapon. It is time. And in today's hyper-connected, dopamine-addicted world, most men are bleeding it dry, hemorrhaging their most precious resource because they have irrevocably surrendered control of it. They wake up reactive, immediately jumping to messages, emails, notifications, chasing the fleeting hit of dopamine from every digital stimulus. They meet people they don't truly need to meet, engaging in interactions that drain rather than build. They make plans they never genuinely wanted, driven by a fear of missing out or a compulsion to conform. They are, in essence, slaves to distraction, slaves to the relentless agendas of others. But the man who walks alone, who understands the profound power of strategic solitude, he doesn't just control his time, he owns it with absolute, unyielding sovereignty. And time, when weaponized with strategic intent, becomes the greatest, most decisive advantage in any arena, in war, in business, in life itself. Machiavelli, with his unparalleled insight into the levers of power, saw this truth clearly centuries ago. He didn't possess vast wealth. He didn't command a kingdom or an army. But he possessed one thing that most rulers, even the most powerful, never truly earned: complete, unassailable autonomy over his hours, his thoughts, his very existence. While they were playing petty political games in the bustling piazzas, he was studying, dissecting history, understanding human nature. While they were arguing in loud, unproductive assemblies, he was calculating, anticipating future moves. While they were chasing fleeting favor and shallow popularity, he was building an unshakable clarity in solitude, preparing for his strategic strike. Because here's the unvarnished Machiavellian truth. You cannot effectively lead anything, be it a company, an army, or your own life, until you first command your own time. And you absolutely cannot command your time while you are perpetually surrounded, perpetually accessible, perpetually drawn into the orbit of others. When you are constantly around people, you inevitably live in a perpetual response mode. You respond to their moods, their demands, their perceived crises. You respond to their pace, their urgency, their incessant noise. You become a reactive entity, not an initiating force. That is why solitude is not just a source of peace or calm. It is a profound, tactical advantage. It allows you to surgically escape the emotional contagion of the masses, the collective panic, the herd mentality that can cripple even the sharpest minds. It lets you operate on your own unique frequency, dictating your own rhythm, your own terms of engagement. And when you control your rhythm, your internal clock, your strategic tempo, you effectively control the entire battlefield. Think about it with ruthless efficiency. The man who is always available is always tired, always depleted. The man who says yes to everything ends up doing nothing truly well, his efforts fragmented and diluted. The man who fears missing out, FOMO, ends up perpetually lost in the swamps of mediocrity, chasing every shiny object but mastering none. But the man who consciously, strategically chooses solitude, he becomes an absolute master of priorities. He doesn't merely fill his time, he uses it with deliberate, calculated intent. Every hour is chosen, not simply given away. Every action is meticulously aligned with his overarching strategic vision, not a mere reaction to external pressures. Every move is made with a profound, unshakable purpose, and that creates a compound effect so powerful it is almost unfair. 1 year of this kind of strategic solitude, of ruthless time ownership, can catapult you 5 years ahead of the man who is perpetually chasing distraction, perpetually entangled in the demands of others. That is why real power, truly transformative power, is almost always quiet. That is why the men and women who genuinely shape history, who fundamentally shift the trajectory of nations and industries, don't announce every single step they take. They vanish. They recede into the strategic shadows. They reappear only when their meticulously planned moves are ready to shift the entire game, to redefine the rules. Solitude is the ultimate secret, because it grants you the sacred room to think deeply and critically, which is a luxury the distracted man simply cannot afford. It gives you the space to plan, to anticipate, to strategize, while others are improvising clumsily under pressure, constantly reacting to the last development. It gives you the vital room to build, to construct your vision brick by unyielding brick, while others are merely talking about what they might do. Here's the brutal, unvarnished truth. If you cannot comfortably be alone with your calendar, your deepest thoughts, and your long-term vision, if you constantly need external validation or company to feel productive, you are not a man who wields power. You are, at best, a pawn in someone else's grander, more deliberate plan. Solitude isn't about isolation for the sake of drama or self-pity. It's about choosing to live deliberately, to operate with surgical precision. You don't waste precious hours on trivial small talk. You don't entertain pointless opinions that dilute your focus. You don't chase people who drain your energy and offer no strategic value. Instead, you eliminate, you organize, you execute. And the result of this ruthless efficiency? Your work becomes sharper, infused with purpose. Your presence becomes rare, imbued with an almost magnetic mystique. Your words, when you choose to speak, begin to carry an immense, undeniable weight, because people can sense that you are operating on a fundamentally different clock, a different frequency than their own. They'll observe, with a mixture of fear and awe. He moves differently. He's always ahead. He never seems rushed, never seems frantic. Exactly. Because while they're hopelessly stuck in the cacophony of noise, you're operating in the profound, strategic silence, meticulously designing the future. Machiavelli knew that rulers didn't just need vast armies. They needed the sacred, protected time to think, to plot, and to act with unflinching precision. And you simply cannot do that when you're always talking, always explaining yourself to others. You cannot do that when you're always available, always accessible, always reacting to the world's demands. You cannot do that unless you deliberately walk away from the herd and learn to live unbothered by the manufactured urgency of others. This is why solitude matters. Not because it looks cool or edgy, but because it buys you time. Real time. The kind of time needed to systematically separate yourself from the herd, to build an unassailable strategic advantage. So if you crave real power, start here. Cut the noise. Own your mornings with an iron will. Block out your hours for deep, uninterrupted work. Stop explaining yourself to those who wouldn't understand anyway, and vanish often with strategic intent. Because the man who walks alone, thinks alone, and builds alone, he doesn't just move at his own pace. He becomes the pace that others, eventually, are forced to chase. So, if you want real vision, a strategic clarity that cuts through all deception, not just hollow, fleeting motivation. If you want strategic power, the ability to shape your world, not just the illusion of surface success. If you want to see how the world truly works, with its hidden mechanisms and its subtle cruelties, you must step away, profoundly and deliberately, and you must stay there until every single one of your comforting illusions, every self-deception, every soft belief, dies a brutal, necessary death. Because when they do, you will not simply return. You will come back as something very few people ever become. A man who doesn't just act differently, but a man who sees the entire complex game differently, from a position of unassailable strategic insight. And when you reach that level, when you truly embody that transformation, you won't just be watching power from the sidelines. You will be wielding it with cold, deliberate precision. If this opened your eyes, if it shattered a few comfortable illusions, then subscribe. Not for noise, but for strategy, for the brutal truths that empower. And like the video, not for me, but for the clarity that sets you free.